Hello and welcome to this eCampus News webinar on time and effort reporting for higher education grants. My name is Dennis Pierce and I'll be moderating this event. I'm the former editor of eCampus News, now a freelance education writer, and I'm excited to have you join us for what should be a very informative session. Today's webinar is sponsored by Kronos, a global leader in delivering workforce management solutions in the cloud. Tens of thousands of organizations in more than 100 countries, including more than 600 educational institutions, use Kronos to control their labor costs, minimize compliance risk, and improve workforce productivity. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to take a minute to just go over some the features of the platform that we'll be using. Today's event will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing anything. Within a few days of the event, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recording, along with a PDF of the slides. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. There'll be time at the end of the presentation for our panelists to address questions. Also, there's a group chat function that you can launch by clicking on the chat button. Feel free to use this feature to chat among yourselves or to contact someone from the eCampus News team if you have a technical question. But please don't use this feature to ask questions of our speakers. If you have a question related to the webinar content, you should use the Q&A link that I just mentioned. So with these items out of the way, let's get started with our presentation. Our speakers today are Casey Flynn and Jennifer Perkins. A graduate of Humboldt State University herself, Casey is now Interim Executive Director of the university's Sponsored Programs Foundation, which manages Humboldt State's grants and contracts. Casey has earned the designation of Certified Research Administrator from the Research Administrators Certification Council, and she's currently pursuing her Master's of Science in Research Administration from Johns Hopkins University. She also serves as President of the California State University System's Auxiliary Organizations Association. As a higher education business consultant for Kronos, Jennifer helps colleges and universities meet their strategic workforce goals, identify metrics for success, and improve operational efficiency. Before joining Kronos, she served as Director of the System Office of Higher Education for the state of Massachusetts. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of tracking the time for work performed at colleges and universities that have funding sources outside their operating budgets. We're going to focus on two of these sources in particular because of their similar tracking needs: federal work-study programs and sponsored research grants. We're going to look at why it's important for colleges and universities to keep careful records of the hours that students spend on federal work-study jobs, as well as the hours that students, faculty, and staff spend on research grant projects. We'll talk about the challenges that are involved in doing this effectively, one of which is that students and faculty often work in multiple jobs and for multiple grant projects, and institutions need to keep separate and clear records for each of these various activities. We'll also look at the implications involved when colleges and universities fail to provide adequate documentation in these areas. And finally, we'll discuss how an automated workforce solution can help colleges and universities successfully meet these challenges, simplifying the process of tracking time and effort and reducing the chances of making an error. So we're going to start the conversation today by talking about research grants. And for that, I'd like to draw upon Casey's expertise in this area. Casey, your organization manages grant programs for Humboldt State University. Can you tell us the scope of your operation and what you're responsible for?
Sure. Thank you, Dennis. And hello, everyone. So my name is Casey Flynn. Humboldt State University is the northernmost campus in the California State University system. So we're at that rural north, about 5 hours of San Francisco. If you keep going, you hit Humboldt State. So we're about an hour from the Oregon border. That just kind of puts you into scope of where we're sitting. We are a primarily undergraduate teaching institution, and we're also a designated HSI, or Hispanic Serving Institution. Our grants management office, Sponsored Programs, has currently about 560 active grants and contracts with a total award portfolio of about $92 million. Each year, we receive approximately 180 to 200 new awards, about 35 million in new funding coming in each year. And most, if not all of those awards will have some component, some budget put aside for wages, for hiring employees, or continued employment of our existing workforce. That funding that we're receiving, we have about 96 different funding agencies right now that we currently contract with, and that's a mixture of federal, state, local government, nonprofit, and tribal funding entities. So we have a little bit of everything in our research portfolio, including some corporate funders as well. We have about 1,000 employees annually that we send W-2s to, but each pay period we're processing, I'd say on average, about 350, 450 time cards per pay cycle, and we pay bi-monthly. So our cycle is the 1st to 15th and the 16th to the end of the month. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale and scope of our operation.
That's great. That's quite an operation for the size of the university that you have. So a key aspect of the grants management process, obviously, is tracking the hours that employees work for each project. Can you talk a little bit about what funders typically require for this and why?
Yeah, I'd say like many research administration offices, one thing is that we're subject to the single audit requirement. That's formally known as the A133 annual audit. And so that requires an annual review of an independent auditor that is going to come in and look at your financials, but also your grant and programmatic compliance to some of your larger federal awards. In those cases, we as an organization need to be able to demonstrate that specific payroll charges were appropriately charged to the correct grant, had the principal investigator or the responsible faculty member's approval, and that those requirements are generally the same that we'd see if we had a federal desk review or a specific audit from a specific agency. So they're all looking for essentially the same types of components. They want to see that the hours charged are reconciling to your general ledger, that the dollar amounts are adding up. They want to see some delegation of authority established, that the person approving or signing that time card is authorized to expend funds on their specific grant. And they want to see that you generally have controls in place that are going to prevent time from mistakenly being charged to the wrong project or to the wrong funding agency. They just want to have a basic demonstration of your internal controls. So that's, I think, what's most important for us when we're thinking about audits from the funder perspective.
And what are the implications if you're not able to demonstrate to a funder's satisfaction that you're charging them for the correct number of hours worked for the project that they're funding?
There's a couple main things you want to be kind of wary of. You could always risk disallowance of charges. So a funder may reject an invoice or a payment if you can't substantiate that the costs were allowable and allocable to their specific grant, right? The federal government never wants to pay for something that's not their bill. So you have to be, the benefit of the proof needs to be on your side to be able to demonstrate that. Worst case scenario, if you got an audit and they found that there was a breakdown in your controls that was significant, they may eventually terminate the award, which could have an effect on other funder relationships or your ability to get new awards specifically from that same agency. You can really kind of burn a bridge there if they realize that you're a higher risk entity. And you also have findings, if you have findings in your single audit that persist, especially without correction or a management plan, it could shift your organization standing into that high risk classification, which could definitely diminish your ability to get new funding. So I think that there's a financial risk of not being able to recoup your funds on cost reimbursable awards, but there's also that gaining that designation as high risk could prevent you from being able to be successful on future awards.
Okay. What are some of the big challenges involved in keeping track of that information and being able to provide that documentation for the funders?
The challenges on paper or digitally?
Let's start with the way that you used to do it before with paper-based timesheets.
Yeah, so for Humboldt State University, since 1952, we were using paper timesheets, and we just moved digitally about 1.5 years ago. So with paper, for students, it meant printing time cards twice a month, hoping they could track down their faculty signature by that 5 p.m. deadline, hoping that they could submit it by the payroll office on campus in time. So that really puts a lot of pressure on the student and also the faculty to be specifically in their office at the time to get a signature. You're relying on those controls to be in the hands of students and faculty that are very busy and they're pushing paper around campus. And so you're always going to create a little higher risk of A, somebody not getting paid on time, or B, turning in something that may have errors in that timesheet. They may have made a mistake and charged the wrong project, or wrote the wrong project number down. They may have charged time to a date that's already outside the period performance. There's a lot of things about paper that really do open up those the higher risk for an audit. For our perspective, there are so many areas that would be very easy for a student or a PI, or principal investigator, to make a common mistake that could eventually be an audit finding. So for us, those biggest challenges really meant trying to create a smart system that could account for some of those really low-hanging fruit audit findings that we would get a lot of times, where a timesheet wasn't signed but was submitted, or it had the wrong project number and got charged the wrong grant. Things that on paper you can't really restrict somebody from, penciling in the wrong number or the wrong date on something like that. We also had a lot of issues with our paper-based system. From a faculty standpoint too, trying to get paper into a payroll office by that deadline, they would send things to campus mail, and sometimes that timesheet might get stuck to the inside of a campus mail envelope. And I don't know if anyone's ever had that situation come up before, but we've found timesheets floating around campus mail 6 years later, and we realized, oh, that never made it to payroll. So I think anytime you're dealing with a paper system like there's so much room for error from just moving that around campus and ensuring that when eventually that timesheet does get to your payroll office, you have something that's accurate and timely, and you're able to process it appropriately without a lot of intervention from payroll staff or from administrating staff having to jump in and maybe make corrections or to contact for clarification on items that a smarter, technology-based system might be able to help prevent.
Right. And I would imagine that those challenges were compounded when faculty worked on multiple grant projects. How did you handle that with a paper-based system?
Poorly. We had one timesheet per project. So that's really common, right, in grants management. I typically wouldn't see one employee working on one project 100% of their time. Typically, you have, employees and PIs splitting their time on multiple projects. And so in a paper-based system, it was one piece of paper per project. So in a payroll cycle, if I was splitting my time on 3 different projects, that meant 3 pieces of paper and potentially 3 different signatures from different faculty members if those grants were not housed within the same department or the same portfolio.
And what did that require on the back end from your grants management staff in terms of, so you had different, like if say a faculty member worked on 3 different grant projects, so they had basically 3 different timesheets. What was involved in your end in making sure that those were processed correctly?
A tremendous amount of time with the paper auditing. We had 5 payroll technicians that every time the payroll cycle was due, they would spend 2 or 3 days reviewing, auditing, math checking, right, timesheets with a 10 key, because again, you're taking a paper something and translating it into a system that can cut a check. So anything that had to do with calculating overtime or any of the additional pay requirements that we deal with faculty and overload salary, really things that are easy to miss on paper. If you have campus holidays, if you have any other types of leave that are really easy to miscalculate on paper, you have to have technicians that are going through reviewing for compliance, but also reviewing for payroll and labor laws and things like that, that they're checking each one before they're able to really process that into a paycheck. For the administration, we also had a lot of issues with chasing down signatures after the fact. So for compliance purposes, if a timesheet was submitted by law, we know that that time exists and have to pay it. So we would process that time, but then on the back end have our research staff go back and get signatures from those PIs after the fact, so we'd have the documentation in the case of an audit. So there was a good amount of FTE devoted to all of these components of a paper timesheet process that were really built around the limitations of that system. The need was there to make sure that you had enough checks and balances but purely because your system wasn't smart enough to bounce things back when the end user was making the mistakes. We could only find those mistakes on the back end, help to correct them, reach out for clarification, but ultimately it was a lot of administrative burden being shifted to our payroll technicians and to our research staff.
Okay. And so can you talk about what that process looks like now that you have implemented an automated workforce management system?
Yeah, it's pretty much been night and day. One of the biggest pieces when we were out shopping and trying to figure out really what we needed from a system and what was out there, our biggest piece was that multiple approvers, multiple projects component. There's not ever going to be a situation where I have, again, that clean employee one project scenario. I need to have some ability to track those multiple projects. So what our system does is looks at the individual, the employee, as one person, but when they're in the system, they have essentially a drop-down list that shows all the projects that they've been pre-approved to work on. They select from a drop-down menu, allocate hours based on project A versus project B, and the nice thing about it is that the system is smart enough to shoot those time cards off to the right people. So if project A has one signer, when I hit submit my timesheet, that's going to go to them for approval. And project B has a different signer, that shoots it off to the other person for their approval. So we're not dealing with multiple pieces of paper, multiple signatures to route. It's treating the employee as one employee of our research foundation, and their time slices are essentially being assigned to the right appropriate signer based on our delegation of authority. So the online routing from employee to supervisor is huge. The one big thing that they need to have is obviously internet access, and for us, again, being an more rural and remote area, that's really the only thing that hasn't, we didn't get gains from, but we also really heavily invested in the mobile apps. And so for us, our research field season can include, students being out in the field for months on end in remote areas in Northern California. We have mini grants that will put a student up in the redwood canopies. They'll be literally in a tree and have to come out of that tree, drive to campus, turn in a paper timesheet twice a month, and that's not feasible for where we are. And so now they just need to find internet access in the areas that they're in, go on their mobile app, submit their time, and again, it's going to route them to their faculty member that might be on, sabbatical, or they might be traveling for their own research project in another county. It takes away the physicality of needing to touch individual people in that time frame to get those signatures and to move the paper around. So from that efficiency from the end user, huge gains there. But on the back end for the administrative staff, we have better central access to the information. We have a heightened visibility on who started a timesheet but not yet submitted. So before, I wouldn't know if someone was working on a project if they were like an intermittent hourly or a student that doesn't have a normal set schedule until they'd physically turn in the timesheet. That would be my trigger to know, oh, this person worked. Now I can go into Kronos or our system mid payroll cycle and see all of the timesheets that are started but not yet finished to at least gauge who are those people that the deadline's coming up and they haven't submitted their time or they haven't got the approvals yet. I can be more proactive and start to nudge those PIs and say, hey, I see there's time in here, you haven't approved it yet, you need to go in and get that done. We didn't have that level of transparency, right? We didn't have the visibility to be proactive, and that's been a huge gain for us as well. It's shortened that time frame that our staff would have to be auditing. Instead of the 5 payroll technicians over 2 to 3 days, we have 1.5 payroll technicians over a day and a half, and it's done. And we still have the same headcount. We still are processing 400 individual timesheets, on average per payroll cycle. So that's been a very tangible gain on the back end side. But from the front end, our users are expressing so much satisfaction in not having to physically drive or mail in or fax in or however, planes, trains, and automobiles they were trying to get paper in to this campus twice a month. That is now not part of the equation. They just have to have internet access.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'd like to bring Jennifer into the conversation as well. Jen, is there anything that you'd like to add on the topic of managing research grant projects and tracking labor costs?
No, I can't imagine having anything to add. Casey's the master. We've been working together with her, and she's actually been helping to guide us on changes that we can make. within Kronos to help her even more. And I think that, we hope that relationship continues and expands as we have more and more customers who are looking to try to use this functionality with their grants.
That's great. So thank you so much. I'd like to shift the focus of the conversation now to tracking the hours worked for federal work-study programs. Jen, you have some experience in this area. So what's required of colleges and universities here, and what are the key challenges involved in doing so?
So, federal work study has been around for a long time. I think it started out in sort of mid-1960s, 1964 or so. And I think one of the major challenges that we have is that the funds that are provided, are meant for a particular purpose and are supposed to be part-time employment for students, based on financial need, allowing them to help earn money towards paying their education expenses. So that's the purpose of the program. I think what the challenges that come around that are sort of, with $1.x billion being dispersed, in 2019, more than $1 billion was dispersed over more than 300,000 different schools, 700,000 awards. It's really difficult as a school and as an institution to be able to track that information back down. So like Casey said, the A133 audit, single audit finding used to be circular 133 is, weighs very heavy here because there are a lot of implications and ramifications for if you don't follow the rules and you have audit findings that come out. So, I mean, you're talking about all sorts of requirements that have to be met, all sorts of information that needs to be stored and shown, and then the audit requirements that are in there, answering those if there is any, going forward, figuring out how to meet all of those requirements. It's not just as easy as saying, okay, somebody can work in the dining hall for X number of hours in order to meet the award that they've been given. And there's a community service requirement. There's only certain people who can employ the students. The schools usually have to have a match, so that match is different based on the work that people are doing. There's a cap on off-campus jobs, so some of the jobs can be off-campus, but not all of them. So you can start to feel how difficult this management of this work is, and yet really, really important. People continue to say, and people continue to show that students that are working on campus are more engaged in their school and thus usually perform better, retain at higher rates, graduate quicker, graduate with higher marks, and even are employed quicker outside of school once they've graduated. So it's an incredibly impactful area with a lot of regulation and a lot of work that needs to be done in order to continue to be in good standing.
You mentioned just the sheer number of rules around the program. Isn't that there one of the rules? There's a rule related to the number of hours that students can work in a week. Is that correct?
There is, yes. And so if a student, and I, jokingly run into students who've become administrators within different campuses, and we laugh because each campus has a rule about what students can work, no more than 18, 19, 20 hours. And if you have, like Casey was talking about, multiple time cards, multiple sheets of paper going to multiple different approvers, there isn't any way to track that. And so, jokingly, I had one administrator come up to me and say, yeah, I know all about that. That's how I got through college. I worked 20 hours in the library and 20 hours in the dining hall. Nobody knew. And, that's against the rules. And it's really not good for the student either, because the idea of being in school is to be studying and be a student. That's your first job. These jobs that you're employed through federal work study or any of the student aid jobs that are, even if it's not federal, even if the campus is just offering it, it's a part-time job. It's not meant to be full-time employment. So by having an electronic system, an automated system like Casey was talking about, you actually can put in alerts and monitoring that shows that the student is coming up on 18 hours, or if they're working between multiple jobs, being able to see, they work 5 hours here, 10 hours here. So if I put them in for another 5 hours, I'm going to be at 20. So I can't give them those 2 3-hour shifts I wanted to give them as the third employer. And that's only possible when you have one timesheet and one schedule, which is the system that Casey was talking about.
Right. So you just mentioned that visibility is a key benefit to an automated system, having that visibility across different jobs, and having automated workflows in place to be able to send an alert if a student's approaching a certain threshold for the number of hours they should be working across multiple jobs. Can you talk about some of the other benefits to how an automated workforce solution can help with managing federal work study, tracking the time worked for federal work study programs?
So, again, one of the luckiest parts of my job is I get to travel around the country and talk to people within the higher ed institutions, administrators and staff, to talk about issues just like that. And so what are some of the benefits, or what are some of the challenges that people are facing? There's, an idea that there's a couple of different cost centers that sometimes support federal work study, and making sure that your school is matching that proper amount up front. So within an automated system, you can actually create payrolls that break that apart based on your match, based on the job that's being worked. So if you have a 90-10 match, a 70-30 match, a 50-50 match, or maybe some of them are 100%, depending on what the jobs are. Again, that's all in the regulations around federal work study. That can be put into the system so that there's no back end calculation that needs to happen. So at the moment that it's being worked, as soon as that's calculated, it puts them into the right buckets so that they can be accumulated separately. And the benefit of that is that you can actually begin to accumulate and see how close you are getting to the end of your award. So as a student or as a manager, I can see how much I have left within my federal award bucket. And that has a lot of implications. The manager of the facility or the dining hall or the bookstore can see when they're going to have to absorb that student's salary, or how much longer they have, how many more weeks they can schedule that person without going back and asking for an additional award money, or going back into their operating budget and finding that money. Prior to that, if your reporting is just a little bit behind, you can be 4, 6, 8 weeks behind. When you start to see that somebody's running out of money at 4, 6, 8 weeks behind, then you still got 4, 6, or 8 weeks that's out there that's already been worked that you have to pay. So I think the visibility, again, into being able to see and track what those dollar amounts are, and as they're being drawn down on, to be able to have a proactive plan. And that's sort of one of the tenets of automating systems in general, is to say, how can we get ahead of things? So everything is in real time. So often Casey said she has bi-weekly payroll. So there's 2 weeks going on in between one payroll and the next payroll. So what's happening within those 2 weeks? A lot of stuff can happen in 2 weeks, or sometimes it's a month. A lot of stuff can happen in a month. So being able to see that in real time as well, I think becomes extremely important for the managers that are on the front line and for the students themselves.
Right.
Going back to a little bit of the earlier conversation where you talked about what are the repercussions, there's some significant repercussions on both Casey's side and on mine. She touched on a bunch of hers, but on the federal financial aid, you can end up on heightened cash monitoring, which I'm sure many of the people on this call know about, and that's a pretty significant impact financially to the university, not to mention a problem that needs to be solved. And that no one wants to be on the naughty list. And when you get on the naughty list, you have to front money that you haven't planned for as a university. And in my time at the state of Massachusetts, we had several institutions that ended up on heightened cash monitoring, and were literally teetering, on financial concern, because they were having to now front money that they didn't have. And it's all because there were audit questions that weren't taken care of, and questions about how they could prove that the money had been spent the way it had been spent. And if you have an automated system, you have an audit trail that shows all of the payrolls that have gone out, down to the person, to the job, to the split, if you have it, that you're required to. So that's, again, with an automated system, all of that is built in, and all those auditing requirements are able to be met in the course of real time of what's happening at any given moment within the system.
Yeah, and I think remember reading some cases of universities that ended up paying large settlements,
Mm-hmm.
federal government for discrepancies in the time and effort reporting for certain grants.
Yeah, multi-million dollars. And, that's, again, no university's planning for that. So, if you like Casey, if you're running hundreds of grants at the same time, making sure you can keep all those separate and you can produce auditable records that show that for grant A, this is how much people have worked, this is what the principal administrator worked, this is what the research assistant worked, this is the time that they were paid, this is the overall amount they made, this is the overall amount we spent, is just as important as being able to show the results of the research that you applied for. So, in Casey's world, she applies for, with her faculty, research grants, and they put together a plan. On the federal work study side, you're just forwarded an amount of money based on past experiences and need. And you have to, in both cases, prove that you're using that money wisely. And the federal government is actually giving you the money ahead of time to do the work. So they want to make sure that they have assurances that their money, as Casey said, has been spent appropriately. And, that's public money. You have a responsibility for the stewardship of public money. So, on both sides of the ledger, sort of on the federal student aid side and on the research grant side, the requirements are very similar. And I think that's why when you guys put this webinar together, you pick those two pieces out of federal student aid or all sorts of student aid that's coming in, because they are so similar in their requirements on the auditing side. And
Right.
again, I mean, Casey can also talk to you about the demand that's coming in. I mean, the demand on the research side and the demand on the federal work study side, it's just increasing. I mean, it's just more and more and more as college gets more expensive, more and more people are clamoring for this aid. And with sort of this increase in accountability. So when you put those two things together, there's significant pressure on our institutions to be able to meet the demand and make sure that they're also can prove that they're accountable to the money that's coming in.
Right. You mentioned accountability, which is a key piece of grants management. In some of the audit findings where it was discovered that there was over-reporting of hours, or maybe certain faculty didn't do the job that they're reporting. Does a automated workforce management solution have any systems in place to sort of help colleges and universities with that accountability piece, like in terms of making sure workers are logging their hours from the correct location, so they're not just claiming hours that they didn't work?
Right. So Casey talked about those guys in the giant redwoods that are hanging from trees while they're doing their research. There are all sorts of ways to be able to understand where someone is when they're doing that kind of research, especially out of the college location. So if they're on a college campus, sometimes, they're in a lab or something, people can see them. It's a little bit more of an understanding you're working directly with the professor or your graduate assistant or whatever, so people can see you. But if you're hanging from a tree in the redwoods doing your research, then there has to be a way that someone can see, again, as part of the audit trail, where did you drop that pin when you logged in? So I walk up to the redwood, I log into my system, I scale my tree, I do my work, I come back down, I log out. I can see as the manager, that person logged in Muir Woods and they logged out in Muir Woods, and that's where they were supposed to be doing their research. Now, if they logged in from downtown San Francisco, then maybe there would be a little bit of a question about what they're doing there or why they're logging in during that time. And that's the kind of thing, again, that the federal government doesn't want to be paying for. The research grantor doesn't want to be paying for somebody who's downtown starting to drive towards their location of research or their location of work. And similarly with federal work study, there's oftentimes that people are doing internships or they're required for hours to do something that's off campus. And you want to have that assurance as a university that you're able to understand where that person is and where they're working and making sure that there's some accountability around that job getting done. And similarly, managers can see that. So they log in, and they can see where somebody has dropped a pin. It's not like Big Brother, nobody's watching you all the time or anything. It's just a sense of saying, when I hit that button for login, they literally, a pin drops on a map, and I can see where that person logged in. I can't see where they went in between log in and log out, but I can see that they were in the right position or not when they logged in. So, and again, it's not, it's not meant to be a Big Brother-ish. It's meant to be, to give people a sense of responsibility and accountability, but also visibility. Because sometimes if you're off campus and you're doing work, it's very hard to have somebody everywhere managing and monitoring those jobs and those activities. Sometimes, it's just grant and effort and time and effort reporting. It's not even somebody getting paid, but you still need the accountability for, I have spent these hours working on this particular project. And I think that's what you get with automated timekeeping. With the sheets that you have, and you're running around with these paper sheets that say I worked 8 to 2 in the Redwoods, you're sort of, it's a little bit more of the honor system than we might all kind of like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I know for Humboldt, we don't necessarily use the geo mapping, but I know that Cal Poly Pomona, for their dining services, that was a big component that they lean on, because what they have it set up is specific to their dining hall buildings, right? So if a student's going to log in, clock in for their hours on their phone, they have to be so close to the building to be able to clock in. So I couldn't clock in as I'm leaving my house driving to work. I'm only able to actually clock in once I'm near enough to that building to physically be starting my shift. And I know that was something that I'm not in dining services, but that was their big value add when they went there. But I think that it does just give you, again, that sense of, accountability when you do have employees that don't necessarily have a specific home base. A lot of our research assistants don't have a physical office on campus. By nature, their job is going to be traveling in the field, going back and forth between labs. And so that does help you give a sense of accountability.
Yeah. Casey, thank you. I know where we sort of shifted to federal work study, which is not necessarily your area of expertise, but I do want to, if there's anything else that Jen was talking about that you want to piggyback off of, please do.
No, I think that the common theme, that's not my area, but it's about creating the wider net of visibility, right? There's so many pieces that interconnects. Even when I'm thinking about time and effort for us as a campus, I still need to have visibility for different sources of money. I care about where my grant charges are hitting, but I also have faculty that are getting paid in different types of sources, being paid on the university, through state funds, through other pots of money. So any of these systems, work study, or other ways that we're compensating our students, our faculty, the more visibility we have, the better reporting we can give. And we don't have these blind spots that exist when we have systems that either don't talk to each other, or that we can't see the full scope of how is this student spending their time. Because again, with paper, or to that example of I'm 20 hours here and 20 hours there and no one's the wiser, it's really easy for that to happen because you don't have the visibility. You wouldn't be able to be proactive and see that. For us, having Kronos be employee-based, the employee is set up and all their time links back to the same person regardless of where it's charging. So I think that's the big common denominator. It doesn't matter what whether it's a grant or work study, it's still just about creating a broader sense of visibility so I can understand, is there a potential for risk there?
Right.
And to add on to what Casey just said, there's a responsibility on the manager's part too, right? So, talking about employees and visibility about their hours, the managers also, it's not just the hours for the employee that's directly punching in and punching out, but they're running a project, and so the idea that they need to know all through, like, I know where I am on my outcomes side. I'm working on a specific outcome. I'm doing research around a specific issue. I'm studying in the Redwoods, for example. Where am I on the financial side? How far along am I? Close? Am I overspending? Am I underspending? And you can see that in real time when you have an automated system. You can aggregate the dollars by position, by grant. If you're managing multiple grants, you might want to see where you are within one grant versus another. And that all is impossible to do unless it's automated. So the data is in a system that you can then query and look at. And basically the way that, and the system that Casey's running has dashboards. And so the dashboards are intended to show you sort of like those needles in the haystack and pull them out for you. So if you're really overspending in some area, or somebody's really clocking a lot of hours unexpectedly, that should be able to pop out at you in that dashboard so that you can reach out and say, hey, what's going on? I'm managing this grant. Looks like you're on a fast track here. What's happening? Are you having trouble? Or, being able to sort of proactively get in front of that rather than waiting until you've run out of money or you're close to running out of money and you haven't made it to the outcomes yet.
Yeah, great.
And it's really cool. One thing that I didn't get to talk about in the federal work study issue is that, with 700,000 awards going out, 300,000 schools, 1 billion plus in money that's allocated for this, there are thousands, probably tens of thousands of students who are under this federal work study. And how on a campus can you manage that from the perspective of just, I have an operation I have a bookstore, and I need to make sure that my bookstore or my cafe is properly staffed, is properly taken care of, so that I don't have long customer lines and I don't have lots of people that aren't being waited on. So when you have an automated system and you can look at, as the manager, your overall scheduling, it's much easier for you to sort of understand and look, how can I do these shifts better? How can I look at my scheduling and make my schedule tighter? Or how can I schedule based on past experiences? Or even maybe, how can my students swap shifts with each other so I don't even have to be in the middle of it? So students can automatically, within an app, go on and see who can take their shift and be able to swap those shifts in real time. And a manager can approve it or not. There's a big engine that sits behind that says, I need a lifeguard who's got CPR, who's free at this time from 4 to 6, who has the training to teach a swimming lesson, who's available, and the app can pop up all of that information. Person can try to find somebody who can take their shift. And so it takes that burden off from an administrative perspective, off the manager, instead of having the manager taking these calls saying, hey, this is Joe and I can't work, next week at this time because I have an unexpected study group test for a test. That person can go on and just sort of take care of that on their own. And that's one of the things that, having everything in technology is really a benefit. It's just a time saver. I always talk about getting time back in your day. That's what we hope for. We hope that what's happening when you put the technology in is that everybody has some of that administrative burden lifted off of them. Students, managers, executives, department heads, whoever's using it.
Yeah, the help with the scheduling piece, I think, is significant as well.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So I want to make sure that we leave enough time for audience questions. So thank you both for your insights. That was really enlightening. If I could just take a few minutes just to summarize what I think I heard from you, and that there was a lot to it there, but I think that sort of the core of the message is that colleges and universities have to keep careful records of the time that students are working for work study programs, that students and employees and staff are working on research grants, and if they fail to do so, the implications can be pretty costly, with colleges and universities putting their grant funding at risk if they don't have an effective way to document all of this activity. And the fact that many students and employees work in multiple jobs for multiple grant projects makes that tracking process even more challenging. But an automated workforce management system can really simplify that and reduce the chances of error, and as well as bring benefits to scheduling and other benefits. Is that sort of an accurate summation? And is there anything else that you'd like to say in conclusion before we get to the Q&A?
I think you summarized it perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. Good job.
Thanks. So we're going to move on to questions from the audience now. And Just as a reminder, if you have a question for Casey or Jennifer, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. If we don't get to all the questions, but you did leave a question through that tool, don't worry, somebody from Kronos will follow up with you directly through email with a response. I see somebody asked, how can a workforce management solutions reporting features help satisfy the requirements, and I'm assuming here like maybe the audit requirements for federal grants? I don't know, Jen, do you want to take that one first maybe?
Yeah, it's probably more of Casey, because the federal grants that are coming through individually from different departments versus this federal student aid. So when federal student aid is distributed, it's distributed as a loan, as a grant, or through federal work study. So all we've really talked about today is federal work study, but definitely on the federal work study side, a workforce management solution can satisfy all of the audit requirements that are in there, and we can go through, you know, specifically to talk about what the federal work study requirements are, but it's very specific on what each piece is. You know, maintaining an adequate timesheet with records of hours for those that have worked, and they have to show separately the day worked and the hours worked and the total hours working during the job. They have to be certified by the student supervisor. So there are some very specific work study policies that you have to show, and that's exactly what an audited or what an automated timekeeping system does.
And my apologies, I started answering that question and I was on mute. So yes, you can, there's two different things about the data reporting. One, we can run reports specific on the employee, so I can see their specific time charge to the grant. I can also spin reports on project basis. And so if I wanted to see, show me project A and all the time charged in the first quarter, right, if my backup for my invoice was on a quarterly or monthly or annual basis, I can actually pull out really good data reports that give me a snapshot on a project basis. So even though the time is coming in with an employee-centric focus, there is reporting that our office can do to show things that are more consolidated for a specific project or multiple projects, so that you can look at it both ways.
Okay. Casey, here's another question for you. How is the data linked from the whatever system you use, like your payroll system to the Kronos workforce management system? How does that interface work?
Yeah, so we have, we're using two systems now. So we used to be, again, on paper, and then we were using a third-party vendor, ADP, to cut our checks. And so we have two flavors of Kronos. We have timekeeping, the time and attendance. That's where the employees are actually submitting and logging their hours and the approvals are happening. And then we also have payroll. And so our checks are getting cut in Kronos. So that's just streamlined and integrates together. Our grants management system, we use PeopleSoft Grants Management. PeopleSoft is a product that is used widely in the California State University system, but I know that it's broader than that. So we have our grants management system set up in PeopleSoft, and there's something called middleware that basically allows Kronos to talk to PeopleSoft. And then there's a push and a pull of data back and forth. So we can continue to use our grants management system to update things like new project numbers, extensions into the period of performance, approved signers, things like that, are all going into the same system we were using before, but that middleware is pushing that data over to Kronos, and so that's one of the ways that we kind of integrated our two systems, our grants management system with our timekeeping system. So those systems are talking to each other to make sure that if my project expires in my grants management system, or I turn that off, I inactivate it because maybe it's out of money, then that's going to get turned off in Kronos automatically, and it doesn't take another human being to go and to push it off. It's something that's integrated. So that's how we kind of have connected the two systems. And I know that that integration is possible with other types of software, not just PeopleSoft. There's a laundry list of ones that middleware can do similar functionality depending on what grants management system you're currently using to track your grants.
Okay. So it would be the you mentioned PeopleSoft in there. It would be that system that sort of shows you like your back end, your ERP system, which would show you how many funds are left for specific grants, and the workforce management system is really more keeping track of the time and effort aspects of the reporting.
Our budgeting system is actually it's called OBI, so it's Oracle Business Intelligence. So OBI is our budgeting software. That's where our financial budgeting lives. Our grants management tracking system is PeopleSoft. And so PeopleSoft is really housing project information, compliance requirements, reporting deadlines, things like that. OBI is what ties into budget, so that's separate for us.
Okay. We have somebody who wants to understand a little bit more how it works when there's a full-time staff member who's paid a stipend through a grant, and how they would sort of keep track of that separately from their full-time responsibilities.
Yeah, stipends are not wages. Stipend is a bad word for us because a lot of times faculty will think about stipends as payroll, and it's not. I know that terminology is even more confusing because some agencies will use the word stipend specifically to describe like an employee-employer relationship. But for us within the CSU, our hard line is if it's truly a stipend, if it's participant support in that definition, it's not processed through payroll. It's not considered wages. It's seen as an educational stipend. It's for books or tuition or some type of educational support. So for us, stipends are processed through the financial aid office and not through our payroll system. But that's specific to our campus and the CSU system. I know that that's not the case for every university.
Okay. So in an alternate scenario where that stipend would be something that would need to be tracked on a punch in, punch out basis or on a schedule basis, if they're getting a stipend every 2 weeks for doing office tutoring on a Saturday, in addition to their full-time role as an example, then that could actually be documented in the schedule and paid from schedule within an automated system. So although I agree with Casey that stipend is a tough word, there is a way within any kind of an automated system that you would have where you could indicate somebody is required to have this job, and they can log in and log out of the extra job, that multiple job, just the way they would if they were a student and had multiple jobs in the bookstore or in the tutoring center or at the IT help desk. So that their functionality that's in there works in the case where you have a full-time employee who's working additional hours that are going to be charged to a separate budget. And that's the key in the back, is that you can have multiple jobs that are charged to the same budget. You can have multiple jobs that are charged to different funding sources. And just like Casey has, hundreds of funding sources that are tied behind the jobs that people are logging into in the grant side, you can similarly have that on the school side as well. There could be jobs that are attached to different funding sources in different areas, or different budgets even in different areas.
All right. So as I understand it, like if I'm a faculty member and I work on multiple grant projects, when I go to log in my time for project A of 3, there's like a drop-down menu, and I choose which project I'm logging my hours in, and then on the back end it's tracking the hours to the appropriate project. Is that how it looks to me as a faculty member?
So
yep,
right, oh, sorry, Casey.
I was just going to agree. It's a drop-down menu, and so you can select. If we have employees honestly that work for our larger research centers, and they are assigned to work on at any time 30 grants. Right? They don't average 30 grants per payroll cycle, but they'll see a very long, what we call their limit list of all the different options of grants that they have the ability to charge time to. They can select one or as many as they need to allocate, and when it gets submitted, it's still treating that employee as one full-time person and looking at their hours in relation to their employment. But then it shoots it off into different lines that eventually get pushed into our general ledger that'll post to the grant budget to show this is the slice that belongs to Grant A versus Grant B on the accounting side.
Okay.
And the reason that that's so critical is if you don't have one timesheet and one schedule that people are all looking at from a visibility standpoint, you can't enforce those limits that we were talking about earlier. So if I have 3 different timesheets, I don't know what what timesheet 1 and timesheet 2 and timesheet 3 are doing. They're separate timesheets. So that's why we at Kronos have this philosophy of one timesheet, one schedule. And I think that helps manage the entire employees' work time with the university, no matter where they're in the back end, where the money is being sliced off to, that employee's time is being kept together. So you can splice it apart for approval. So if I'm approving only grant A and Casey's approving the work done on grant B, then the time she comes in, I only see my hours, she only sees her hours, but it's just a way to slice off for approval. It's actually never really, unattached to each other. It really is just one timesheet.
Right. And to sort of continue the scenario of the employee who works on multiple grant projects, what's involved in setting that up in the back end, Casey? Like, so the institution secures a new grant program. Is it a matter of going in and like assigning a separate code, a new code for that grant project and indicating who has the authority to be working on that project, and then those people will see that code in their drop-down menus when they go to log their hours?
Yep, that's still a function of our administrative staff. So again, when I get a new grant, I set it up in PeopleSoft, which is my grants management system. Once that grant is live, it's active, it's open, and the period of performance begins, that's something that could sync into Kronos. And so if on that same day the grant started, I would have the employee or the supervisor turn in an appointment form. And so unfortunately, we are still on paper hiring documents, but that hiring form would tell me that project A is getting added to their list, at which rate, at what time base, all the other information approved by the supervisor saying, I'm authorizing this person to start working on this project A. And then we, as an administrative staff on the back end, will go into Kronos and add that new project to their list. If they're a brand new employee, we set them up, and that's a little bit longer. But if they're already existing, it's easy to continue to add more projects to their list. And then again, the old stagnant expired projects will fall off of their list eventually. So that's the nice thing about the housekeeping. If I have a long-term employee working here for 20 years, they're not going to see this endless list of all these old expired projects. They're only, at any given time, going to see their current active allowable projects to charge by, which is also how we control employees accidentally submitting time on expired projects as well.
Okay. We're getting close to the end of our time, so I want to conclude with one final question that I'll ask to both Casey and Jennifer. What should I look for in an automated system for tracking grant activities? What are there specific features that people should be looking for that make it a lot easier?
I would say something that makes your life easier, not harder. I mean, there's a lot of functionality that we went into before we even knew what product, what system we needed. We sat down and said, what is our Cadillac system? What about our current process really causes an onerous amount of time and effort of staffing to try to correct or to fix or to process? And we kind of listed out our wish list and crossed that with our audit, right? What are the wish list items? How is that going to help us pass an audit? How is that going to make things more efficient and more visible for all of our staff? And we used that as our shopping list to figure out what do we actually need, because we knew that it wasn't just about translating, here's what I do on paper today, make this digital, because there was a lot of things about the paper system that we had created just out of circumstance. Like, there wasn't things that we were doing because they needed to be done that way. We created processes and procedures around a system that had to be done that way because that was our solution at the time. So I would say that when you're looking to change or looking to really develop something that's going to be smarter and make your life easier, don't think about trying to translate what I do today into this new product. Try to think about what are the end goals, what are the things that I absolutely need to have to pass my audit, and then what are the things I'd love to have to make my life easier, to make it more efficient for my staff to process, to save me time, and try to build out a system that does those things. Because there's a lot of areas that we had to compromise on to say, well, we were doing this thing this way for decades, but we don't have to do it this way. We just were doing it this way because we had no other better option. And we realized that there was a lot of systems and processes that we were clinging to that actually had no more relevance to what we needed from a system today. It's change management. It's hard to let go of the things and the people that want to initial and stamp a timesheet and do all their extra things on the back end because they feel like that creates better processes for them. But really, it's us building processes around what we've been doing and what we're used to doing. So my biggest advice is just to go into it not trying to convert something into a new platform, is to really sit down and say, what do I need from the new system to get me do an audit and to save my time and to make it easier on everybody, both on the user end and on my staff.
Okay, great. Jen, do you want anything to add there?
I think, lessening the complicated nature of some of these things is what our goal is. And so Casey's absolutely spot on. Paving the cow paths of how something was done for the last 20 or 25 years doesn't mean that's the best way or the easiest way. And so hopefully, you engage with somebody who wants to be a partner and who can understand and help you understand what you actually need and what can be delivered. It's definitely nobody's going to meet 100% of what you're doing now unless there's a miracle somewhere. But you can get pretty close, and I think sometimes if you rethink what it is that your end goal is, then it opens up a lot of different opportunities for you as well.
Yeah, great. Oh, thank you both so much. I really appreciate your help here. I'd like to once again thank our presenters today, Casey Flynn and Jennifer Perkins, for a very informative presentation. I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. So I hope you found it informative, and thanks again for participating. Have a great day.
Thank you.